Welcome to the AI Revenue Summit. My name is Pete Ketchum, CMO here at Signals. The event is being hosted by Signals, and to also mention our sponsors with VIB and Silicon Slopes. With that said, this is the first time that we are running this type of event, AI Revenue Summit. We do run quarterly events, as many of you have probably participated in, but I will say this is edging to be, if not our most well-attended event that we've held thus far, closing in on 5,000 total participants. Billy Bateman, co-founder of Signals, also just announced many of the award winners from our voting pool, which again, we had a lot of participation in that voting pool. I think we had over 60 total nominees, crowd nominated, crowd voted for. So a big accomplishment to all of our award winners. So congratulations to you all again. With that said, and all the participation activity going on with this event, with the voting around the subject of AI, it's pretty apparent that there's a lot to talk about, and that's what we're going to be diving into in this keynote session. Joining me is Dave Elkington, as I bring him into here, founder of Insight Sales, sits on the board of Utah Tech University, also helps propel one of the largest COVID vaccine companies in the United States, author, and co-author of many articles. Dave Elkington, sure. What haven't you done that I haven't mentioned?
Enough. That's enough. Yeah, that's plenty.
So with that said, Dave, we're jumping into AI Revenue Summit and around generative AI, ChatGPT. And as we kind of talk about some of this stuff, there's a little bit of like, hey, well, what does that mean? What's the definition there? Can you help kind of set the stage a little bit for us? What is AI? What's generative AI? Kind of where are we at? What's that foundation definition we need to start out with?
Yeah. So look, there's so much confusion around like these words and these concepts and these subjects, but it's actually I think it's way easier than I think a lot of us make out of it. Okay, so think the big category at the top of everything is AI, and that's super broad, right? So if you go to like look at Wikipedia and say like, what's AI? AI is like that superset of things, whether it's algorithms or math or ways to basically systematically or mathematically or algorithmically come up with outcomes. So think statistics would belong to AI, rules engines, like think the Choose Your Own Adventure you read as a book, that loosely could be interpreted as an AI, all the way to machine learning and even down to GPT, a GPT type or generative AI algorithm. So a subset of AI is machine learning, and that's algorithms that are self-learning or can be used, and trained to kind of self-train and be better. And a subset of that is generative AI, which is a type of machine learning algorithm that's specifically designed to generate content. So typical machine learning, we'll get into this a little bit. It's actually kind of interesting. It's been around forever, right? Like machine learning is well over 50 years old. And the math has evolved, but a lot of the core algorithms, the core math that machine learning is based on has been around, since the 80s, like things like neural nets. A lot of these have been around, but what's happened is they've evolved and they've been improved. And there's algorithms that, optimize getting data in or doing it on smaller, computers. There's just a lot of optimization that's been done around it. Now, generative AI, and that's kind of why candidly, that's probably why we're talking, is machine learning used to generate content. So it's based off of a large language model, in particular, ChatGPT is a large language model, and basically what it does is way simpler than I think everybody's made out of it. And my guess is many of the attendees today, the listeners, know this. So I apologize for some of the simplicity of what I'm going to share. But basically what a generative AI algorithm does is it looks at past examples of content, and think content more broadly, not just words, but it could be images, it could be songs, it could be audio, it could be behaviors, anything that you can interpret content from the past. It says, okay, these are the patterns for this series or this set of data based off of this series of content or this set of content and these instructions. What's the most likely next set of content to come out? And what's interesting is the principle behind it is it tokenizes it. And what that really means is it takes some piece of content and says, I don't care what actually is in the content. I'm just looking at the sequence when this token shows up and then this next token shows up. What's most commonly the very next token to come up? And it's looking at that en masse. That's what generative AI does. So it generates content. Now, what's super interesting about that for all of the people who are listening today is as sales, marketing, and revenue leaders and representatives, our key role in the market is to actually do two things, in my opinion. Number one, generate relationships with people, like help people, customers, potential buyers who want to understand more about what we do and what we're selling. They want to understand this. All right, our goal is to develop relationships so they can talk to us. And we need to also then generate content so they can learn about us and what we sell and what our companies do. So generative AI should be the Shangri-La for all revenue related, individuals. And I think the reason there's so many attendees on today's summit is I think we all intuitively know that. And we're seeing little use cases of it. But I think, today out of the other speakers and hopefully out of today's conversation, I think we'll see that. I think there's a lot that's happening right now.
Great. And so, you mentioned, hey, this has been around for a while, right? Some of the generative AI, the machine learning. So what kind of insight can you give us as to why have we hit such an AI revolution over the past 8-10 months or so that's got everybody into the tools and the plugins and GPT and so forth?
Yeah, so now it's a softball, right? So it's an interesting question, but I've not heard anyone really describe or think about it the way that we're, I think, going to talk about it right now. Machine learning, and I studied machine learning in my master's program, and so machine learning is typically before what happened when OpenAI introduced, ChatGPT last November, nearly a year ago, to use a machine learning algorithm is kind of intensive, right? So you have data scientists, you have machine learning software engineers, you've got, it's the whole payload of people who have to figure this out. And there's really three key things. You have to do kind of the preparation. It's called data engineering or data preparation. And there's data scientists who this is what they do. And in short, what they do is they get all of this data and they coerce it. They manipulate the data in a way that can be consumed by an algorithm. Then you have the middle section, which is tuning that algorithm, which is like, okay, it's not quite what I thought. Let's think about tuning a car. You buy a car, you want to really optimize it. You got to think about, okay, how much oxygen, how much fuel, what's the timing? Like there's things that you do to tune a vehicle. Well, you tune a machine learning algorithm. And then you take the outcome of that and you have to interpret that and synthesize it, back to improve your results. What happened a year ago, and look, everybody who's been, in listening at all knows that, data science has been this big boom for the last 10 years. And, there's all kinds of, new programs at universities where data science, scientists are getting trained. But what happened a year ago was the consumerization of AI. And what I mean by that is, as of November last year, it doesn't take a degree in machine learning. It doesn't take a degree in computer science. It doesn't take a degree in data science. It doesn't take a degree in statistics to do those three things. So any consumer, so you went from, call it hundreds of thousands to now billions of people have the ability to become data scientists. That's what happened a year ago. And if you think about ChatGPT, that's exactly what we're doing. We're getting data. We have some problem or some question we want an answer to. We have to go get the background information. We then put it in ChatGPT or Bard or whatever generative AI that we care about. We then get an answer and we're like, okay, that's not quite what I meant. And then we tune the algorithm. We're like, oh, really? So if we're asking, GPT, write me a sonnet. Okay, because we all did that. Or, write me a poem. Like, because when it first came out, we're like, oh, this is really, right. What can this thing do? So we're like, okay, write me a sonnet. We're like, okay, cool. No, I actually don't want a sonnet. I want a limerick. And I want it in the form, I want you to use cat language. And it's like, okay, I'm going to write a cat language limerick for you. Now, about half of the writers our listeners right now are like, I'm going to go try that right now. And it actually does that kind of crazy stuff. And so you tune the algorithm So you first get all the data. You say, okay, I want a limerick. I want it to be this long. I want it to be blah, 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 blah. It gives you an outcome and you're like, nope, this is what I really meant. So you go through this iterative process of tuning and then you get the results and you're like, okay, now I'm going to interpret this and I'm going to go put it in this, this card that I'm going to send off to my sweetheart who loves cat language, limericks.
Of course.
Now, but what happened a year ago was we no longer require deep expertise, mathematical expertise to become a data scientist or a machine learning expert. Literally anybody who has the ability to interact with a prompt has the ability to become a data scientist. It's stunning. Like I'm telling you, we just made a transition that I think will change. In fact, if you think about, in my opinion, where we're at in this life cycle of machine learning and AI, we're not even in the first. We're not even in the first. What is it in baseball? Like the first inning, right? Yeah. We're just sitting down in the ballpark. We just got our peanuts and our popcorn, and we're like, okay, this is going to be a good game. Like that's where we're at in the evolution of what I believe is going to happen as a result of generative AI and the consumerization of AI.
So then, when we were talking a little before this and earlier this week, we ran across some interesting statistics, right? We looked a little bit into different areas, different studies that have been done, Boston Consulting Group, McKinsey, MIT, and so forth. And just to kind of show the scope for the audience, like, okay, yeah, we all know it's big, but really how big? Do we really understand how big it is? Here's some interesting facts to kind of pull out, right? So 70% of PhD holders in AI now work in the private industry. That's up 20% from 2 decades ago, and that's coming from MIT. Now, Stanford found that the U.S. government spending on AI contracts reached $3.3 billion last year, 2022. Now that's up $2.7 billion. I mean, so how much of 1,000% up is that, right? Yeah, you're going to say something like that.
Yeah, no, it's the point of this is everybody is seeing this and is shifting just paradigmatically into this. And the government's doing it, and they're the laggards, right? If the government's doing it, they're so far behind everybody that this is a big thing. I mean, you have a few other stats. I'd love to hear it.
Yeah. Well, let's see here. So we got overall. This was really interesting. This comes from Goldman Sachs research. Generative AI advancements could boost global GDP by 7%, is what they're estimating, around $7 trillion, and raise productivity growth by 1.5% over the next decade. So those are kind of numbers that we haven't seen in that time frame. And then another kind of like interesting insight as to the scope of what went into these kind of programs is McKinsey released some interesting information on ChatGPT specifically, and saying that it took around 45 terabytes of text data. And what that attributes to being is about 1 million feet of bookshelf space, or a quarter of the entire Library of Congress. So, I mean, when we think about, I want to do this next tool, or I want to build this into the software, and like, I'm going to do our own thing. You're like, hold on a second, what's available to us? How do we leverage what's already out there, and using good practices to include AI so that we're not making some of these mistakes that we are earlier. Maybe we put in the poem, we're like, oh, well, that was fun, and then go back to our day. Like, there's a lot that's been put into this. There's a lot coming from it. And there's more to leverage, so we can drive that revenue and other advantages.
So there's an interesting thing you bring up, kind of the scale and what's about to happen in the market. And one thing I don't think everybody necessarily realizes, but that's probably not true. I think most people get it. They just don't understand the scale and the scope. But it feels to me like, Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, has said things like, this is the new iPhone moment. I think it's bigger than that. Right? Like, I think, and, of course he has a lot to gain from it because it's his GPUs, his processors that are driving all the AI. So of course, he wants to make sure that everybody knows how big it is and buys more of his GPUs. But I think what's happened is just as a transition happened in the late 1800s in the Industrial Revolution, where people went from kind of this artisan approach to manufacturing, where they would go build one thing at a time, and it was beautiful, but it was very slow. Someone would sit down and handcraft a chair, or they'd handcraft, a rifle, or they'd handcraft or whatever. And then through the Industrial Revolution, we saw, lots of machinery, emerge, automation, where the productivity scale just went, wildly higher. Yet there was, you have to know, there were some people there who were saying, these, fandangled machinery, like I'm going to stick, doggone it, I'm going to stick with, my artisan approach. And look, there probably is room for some of those folks, but I would wager most of the people who rejected kind of that disruption to the way they did business were out of business, fairly quickly. I think we're back in that very same moment. So, I think a lot of people who are attending today either intuitively or explicitly understand this is a similar moment. You don't really have an option to ignore this. In fact, I think BCG in their study, this is a study done literally just 2 months ago, which everything is moving so quickly, basically said 81% of CMOs think, that's not, it's somewhere in here. There's a stat that basically says, inaction is not an option. Literally, I'm kind of scrolling through. Everybody has to be involved in this. So the point is, if you're not experimenting, if you're not doing something, there's a very, very high likelihood that you're going to be disrupted. Because again, that same shift during the Industrial Revolution, we're in this disruption of kind of the consumer AI revolution. Like we're right in the middle of it, or at the beginning of it. And I think there's opportunity for winners and losers right now.
Yeah. No, that's super helpful. I mean, because as we're talking about, what does this mean, right? What does this mean for the B2B space? We kind of got into, well, what are some of the misconceptions that are happening around in B2B or in the business world? Because like you said, you have that consumerization now. It's available to everybody. Anybody can do this, but are we in the right mindset of doing it to leverage that information? Are we doing the steps kind of you talked about earlier, doing the prepping, tuning, interpreting some of the results? Are we in the right mindset to do that? So what are some of those misconceptions that you're seeing out there, and how do we kind of move around those?
Yeah, so you just kind of brought up, and it's a paradigm that I think we need to really embrace, which is just like a educated, university trained data scientist thinks about machine learning in these 3 steps, where it's like, okay, number 1, we have to do the data preparation. Number 2, we have to do the tuning, and then we have to do kind of the analysis and potentially iteration on that whole process. This consumerized AI, or this generative AI, is the same thing. So I think it is not a catch. There's not one easy way to do this. It's not like you can say, oh, go solve this, go solve all my problems. It feels as though it's that mature, but it's actually not. And I'll give you an example. In the spring, I'm as you'd hope and you'd expect, I'm an early adopter of this stuff. So I was like, I think it was probably the first day you could go buy the premium account with OpenAI. Of course, I went and paid the $20 a month and did it. And my Sonnet's got that much better. But it was interesting. I sit on the board and involved with several companies, one of which is the sponsor company, the Signals, and they had just finished a survey. They had the raw survey results, and I reached out to Pete and the team and said, give me the results. I'm going to go, because every time they do a summit like this or an event like this, they typically do a survey, and somebody goes and gets the results, hires a data scientist to go run, or a statistician. They run the analysis on the results. They find correlation. They write it up and they say, hey, here's what's based off of what people have just said. Here's what's happening in the market, in the industry. And I just thought, we don't need it anymore. GPT can do this whole thing. So I got all the results. I copied and pasted. I think it was a SurveyMonkey outcome, and put it in there. And I went through that. Got the data already. Got it in there. Had to do it in some different blocks because it was quite a bit. And so data prep, number 1. Number 2, I was like, okay, great. Let's tune this thing, because it was not right at first. I'm like, oh no, that's not quite what I'm asking. And then I did it again. I probably spent 2 hours trialing and error, and I was learning. And then finally I was like, I got it. Like I did the analysis, like this looks great. And my 19-year-old smart aleck boy walks behind me and said, "Oh, Dad, like GPT can't run statistics right now. Like it's hallucinating. It's making up, results to try and give you an answer because you keep pushing for an answer. It just wants to give you an answer. It did." And he's like, "Just go double check the math." And so, I pull out my calculator. I'm like, "Oh crap, this is totally wrong. It looked right, but it's not. None of the math was right." And so I think there's this perception that it's potentially more mature. Now, what's interesting is in prep for this, I had asked you, Pete, to go run the exact same analysis again using plugins that, in fact, like Wolfram Alpha, which if you're not using OpenAI with Wolfram Alpha to do the analytical analysis, that's a quick, easy win that you're going to get out of today. And I said, okay, go use Wolfram Alpha, go use some of these other plugins and tools that have now enhanced OpenAI's capabilities, and let's see how it works. Today, this is like 4 months later or something like that. And share what you found.
Yeah. So I guess kind of stepping back just a smidge in the process there for me was we kind of talked a little bit more about that prepping, tuning. We're going to analyze the data and so forth. And when I got in there, I used the Wolfram Alpha plugin, got the data in there and said, hey, I need this to be interpreted. Got the PDF into GPT to interpret it. And once that happened, it literally just gave me the statistics from the survey, which is what you can already read from the survey. I was like, well, that's not helpful at all. And so kind of not being familiar with that use case within GPT, I went ahead and just asked, I said, okay, how do I use Wolfram Alpha appropriately to be able to translate a survey and get an analysis done from it? And it gave me a lot of suggestions from there. And so then I realized, okay, I was thinking a prep level here. What I need to do is my prep level, a whole level higher. So I went through, did the prep, and by prepping, I'm just saying, hey, this is the kind of analysis I'm running. This is what it's from. These were the survey takers. This is the event that it was around. These are the analysis concepts that we're looking for. These are the learnings we're looking for. And just kept going into the nitty gritty of like what we're looking for and kind of building almost like the GPT data analyst for the specific request, right? Like GPT could do it all. I just was so vague that it just gave me a vague response. And so once I kind of told the chat conversation within this algorithm, the bot, saying, okay, this is who you are. This is who this information is coming from. Now run it. It came back with spectacular results. I mean, it was fine-tuned enough to where I would say the accuracy level is right there, 90%. Yeah, you could export it and then kind of do the finishing touches on it. But that's kind of the result of it, and it shocked me from the results.
And so to answer your question, I think the misperception is, one, this thing's changing like weekly, even daily in some cases. So they're adding features, plugins are getting approved and getting added in there. There's you have Bard that is improving and adding capabilities. There's more traditional vendors like Salesforce.com or 6sense or Clary. There's a whole bunch of companies who have been doing more traditional AI, are also integrating generative AI, whether it's Bard or GPT or Amazon or whoever's providing these tools. So the market is changing at this accelerated rate. So like minimally, you should be talking to your peers. You should be benchmarking, talking to other people, saying, what are you finding that's working? You should be attending events like this. Like you've got to be super adaptive. Like the idea of like having an annual strategy plan on how to use AI is not valid. That's kind of lesson number one. Lesson number two, you need to not try and rely on AI to do too much. I mean, the first thing I did is I gave it all the results and say, run the analysis and then write up the summary of the analysis. And it was just, I think my incapability, my inadequacies of understanding its inability to run statistical analyses at the time, and then do multi-step things, I probably was not a good enough prompt engineer to do that. And so the other thing, kind of number two, is stick to very discrete, simple problems. And then I would say the third thing, and this comes out of the BCG study, which we'll make the link available. And they've got kind of, in response to this inaction is not an option premise, they basically have 4 steps that every organization should do. So number one is just start experimenting. And I'll give you an example of that. But let me hit all of these things. Number two, find game-changing outcomes. So play with things, find things that work, find ones that really make an impact to your company, your role, your department. So find these game-changing outcomes. Then number three, at that point, then establish an enterprise-wide model. And then finally, fourth, then implement guidelines, kind of responsibility guidelines, because it's something we'll maybe talk about if we have time today. But 81% of CMOs believe there's a need, and we'll see regulation of generative AI, meaning there's ways to use it effectively and appropriately, and there's ways that you shouldn't be using it, and it's probably inappropriate. And so again, if we have some time, we'll talk more about that. But let me give you an example of that experimentation that companies should be doing right now. So as I was, preparing to speak with everybody today, I went and interviewed, dozens of CMOs, CROs, people, in multiple industries to see what's real, because there's so much hype. So I'm like, okay, what's real? What are you using? What are you not using? And hopefully it's a consolation to everybody. What I found was everybody is in the ideation stage. Everybody is either pre-experimentation, curious, or they're just in the early stage of experimentation, trying things out. It's way earlier than I think the media would suggest we're at from a development stage. So if you're not that far down your path, nobody is, from what I could find. There's a few people who are further, but most people are still in like hey, what do we do? Pragmatically, I think everyone's like, boy, we're behind it. I think people are trying to integrate it into their products if they have technology companies, but Pete, it's super early. And so one of my favorite interviews I had with somebody was, I sit on several company boards, one of which just recently we were at a lunch with with all of the investors, and one of the investors, a private equity firm, shared a story as I was kind of questioning people of where they're at in their generative AI journey. And the managing partner who was it was actually a lunch, who was at the lunch with us, shared he knew that there was a need to do something. So he decided to create a competition amongst his entire firm. So he first, I think, brought somebody in to do a training so everybody understood the basic principles of what AI and generative AI is. I mean, and he's including like janitors, secretaries, assistants, managing partners, investment partners, principals, think in a private equity firm, the entire stack, the entire employee base. Then what he did is he created a competition, and he said, I want everybody in the firm to find one key problem that they face every week in their job. So something that they do over and over. It's like, oh, I've got to solve this problem. And then he created, again, this competition and said, with awards, I mean, the works, and said, whoever can come up with the most elegant generative AI solution gets these specific awards. So two examples that really I think would be helpful for me was one of the secretaries. The problem she chose to try and address was every week, several times a week, there will be a meeting where she's tasked with getting lunch for all of the participants of the meeting. And it could be, 3 people, it could be 30 people, it could be these very large lunches. And the problem she was faced with was there's preferences and there's allergies, and, someone may be pregnant and has limitations, and someone may have, you can imagine, and it seemed like a trivial task, but getting everybody happy in a lunch is, within a budget and within a time frame is actually surprisingly difficult. So what she did is she collected all that information. So step one, she did all the, the data preparation, the feature engineering, all of that kind of thing. She got all of the data and got it in a document. She then used that, entered it into ChatGPT and said, okay, I need a lunch that accommodates all of these constraints and limitations and needs and requirements. And these are the people, and here's where we've eaten in the past. You can imagine all of these different constraints she put in here, and said, give me some recommendations for each of the individuals that are going to be at this lunch from a single restaurant. And these are, food preferences, and you name it. And it did, and it came back with some options. And I think she'd asked, give me 3 different restaurant options using plugins. And I don't remember, I don't think he shared what plugin options, she was using, but using options of restaurants that could accommodate these needs in the region that could then deliver within the time frame. And then she used another plugin or another generative AI app that then actually integrated, I believe, and made the order and had the orders delivered using, something like Uber Eats or DoorDash or some delivery service. So I mean, to me, I was like, that's a brilliant woman. That's somebody, in this case, he shared like, man, she just saved, dozens of hours a month off of her work. Now, the second one from the same lunch was one of the partners, one of the investment partners. And he gets dozens of pitch decks, PowerPoints, and PDFs of companies who want to raise money from this private equity firm. In this case, and this takes him hours a week to go and get these, process these, evaluate the companies, reach out, pardon me, and collect all of the data. So he similarly wrote an algorithm that said, this is all of, or first he did all the feature engineering, said, this is all the data we need from these things like, what's the revenue growth, what's the industry, what's the region they're in, who are the employees, how many employees. You can imagine all the things that a venture firm or a private equity firm would want to know about a firm before they would consider investigating whether they should do an investment. So he collected all of those questions, as a prompt engineer, and said, okay, I need all of this information. And so he used one of the plugins that allowed them to consume, the PowerPoint or consume the PDF, collected all that information, then through another integration, generated a document and the raw data, uploaded that into Salesforce.com, their CRM, that then allowed him at the end of the week to say, okay, show me all the companies that sent us a pitch or some pitch deck or pitch, PDF this week, and show me all of them within this range that we would potentially invest in with this industry and so forth. And so it saved him just like, even within a week, a dozen plus hours, I guess, significant amount of his work week. And so I think the key that companies need to be thinking about are specific, discrete problems, and then begin experimenting with these and empower your entire organization to do these and take the time to make these kind of experiments.
Yeah, I love that. When you were sharing these examples, it makes me think a little bit of when you're plugging in some of these sequences or workflows into Zapier or Make.com, they kind of force you to go through a step and say, okay, first connect your Google Mail, and then put it into Google Docs and so forth. And what it does is at each step it says, okay, this is connected. Is everything looking right? And you yes or no, and you make those changes. And then it runs a test to make sure each section's working before it moves on to the next thing. And so it kind of like going back to the example we talked about from the study, from the survey, and then with the two examples here, each and every time it's kind of like, hey, do a little bit, test it out, see if that worked. And then you can kind of build on top of it rather than trying to take a massive scope project and be like, okay, I did it, now test it. I go, it doesn't work. All right. Either you waste a lot of time or it's kind of discourage future usage. I think in that case, that's going to be critical when we're implementing AI technologies, whether it's something simple or more, a purchase tool that's more expensive. You want to scale it appropriately.
And they went through, as this managing partner described it to me, that very same process. So it's like, okay, I get the data or I get the information that I can ask a reasonable question that it can answer and give me, the kind of results I want. Then I tune it. I got to okay, you're going to be wrong. And then I get the data and I kind of say, okay, is this really what I meant? So that 3-step process was exactly what they went through. So as people think about how do we use this in revenue generating opportunities, like they need to, they shouldn't expect it to work the first time. This is an iterative experimental process. So again, I want to kind of reiterate what BCG said. They said, number one, start experimenting. And that's an amazing example. Create a competition. Everybody pick a problem or a method to, or something they want to solve. Once they've done that, find the ones that are the game-changing outcomes. And then once they get those, establish an enterprise-wide model that everybody can then go leverage and use. And then from that, put guidelines around it. But they talk about don't do the guidelines too quickly because it'll limit the ideation and the experimentation phase.
Yeah, love it. And it's always on our mind, like working as we're going through marketing and stages. You've got your ABM processes, your demand gen, and it's similar. It's kind of the similar rules, right? There's no exception. You don't just build a whole program and then move on. So, so we talked a little bit about driving the revenue. If we're going to do it, do it in small steps. But would you have anything else to add to it when we're saying, hey, businesses to leverage AI to drive more revenue? What should we be thinking about? What areas, if, like you said, you talk to many people, they're doing nothing, still in the ideation phase. Where should it start? Where should the processes start?
Yeah. So the obvious place that people, and I'm not going to surprise anybody, but the content creation is the easiest and obvious way. And if you think about it as a sales rep or a marketer, that's what we do. We generate content. So that could be blogs, that could be ad content. It could be email content. It could be email headers. It could be PowerPoints that we provide to sell, to potential prospects and buyers. This could be proposals. This could be filtering. So think about, and again, in that same, I'm a little bit, redundant on this, but that same BCG study kind of shared the number one generative AI test that people have been making is personalization. So 67% of the CMOs, and they surveyed, I think, 200 CMOs, 67% of those said they've been using and experimenting with generative AI to kind of accommodate personalization. And so, this could be all the way from, think about personalization in your web content or your email content, or create personalized shopping experiences, or goals. There's all kinds of personalization, even from a sales rep perspective. People are using it for personalizing emails as they're sending them out to prospects. So rather than sending template emails, so personalization is by far and wide the most experimented area that people are both trying and seem to be seeing success. The second one is insight generation. So trying to, just like we were doing with the survey, try and get insights out of information. And that could be behavioral information we're getting from buyers as they're on our website. And that's something Signals, the company, has just announced. I think Billy just announced today that they're using generative AI to take all of the behavior in the sales process. So that could be, they're coming in and they're clicking on specific ad types. It's behavior on a website. So, how long they're on a website, how often they come back, the frequency, how many, think account-based signals, where they're basically looking at the signals of that people are giving, the digital signals, the digital demeanor and behavior. They're using generative AI, saying, okay, we're taking the content of the behavior and we're predicting the likely future behavior, so they can determine the likelihood that somebody becomes an MQL or an SQL or even a customer. So, insight generation was the second thing they highlighted where people are experimenting. And again, I think Signals, the host of the company, is seeing some interesting early success on that. Content generation was the third one at 49%. So nearly 50% of people are using it for content generation. And then things like market segmentation or social listening. And they're like I said, we'll provide the link to the full, and it's worth digging in. But anywhere we're generating content, again, as a sales rep, you're sending emails, you're leaving voicemails, you are sending proposals, you're sending presentations, you're orchestrating, your presentation. Something as simple as, and I'm hearing little bits of experimentation of all of this. If I'm going to do a demo for a specific prospect who's in the healthcare industry for my solution or some kind of solution presentation, I can put the content, the personalization information of this specific prospect. I can put the features of our product, and it can actually give me a script or at least a bullet sequence of the kinds of things that would likely be more interesting to the prospect in my presentation. So that's the kind of stuff. In fact, you've told me one, before this, that you used to generate a marketing video. Kind of, I think it'd be super helpful for people to hear what you did with this.
Yeah. So we were building a video out, and we wanted to say, okay, what can we do with the tools that are out there? And
It's
so
like a 2-minute video, right? It was like a 2-minute
short
website
video.
marketing video.
Exactly. And it was kind of an add-on. So it really wasn't, we didn't have time built in for it as well. So it was like, okay, how do we kind of scrape this together and get it done, but get done right? So what we ended up doing was building it into a AI generative model. And we said, okay, this is the mission statement. This is who the audience is, just kind of spec'd all that stuff out and gave the background and the preparation. And we said, okay, we're looking for a 2-minute video. Let's generate enough content and just kind of see what the AI tool put out. And when it
For
did,
a script, right? This was a script. It wrote a 2-minute script based off of all of your information.
That's right. Yeah. So it was
good.
really impressive. Like I know I tweaked it, but it was very little. I was like, wow, like this is maybe a better job than I do after a couple of days. So So it went through there, and then the next step was, okay, well, now I need a voiceover for it. So we looked for an AI tool that would do some voiceovers. So I went through a couple tools, kind of did some trials through there. There's a lot of selection of different voices, and I was able to also kind of match up, saying, hey, this is the pace that I want. This is kind of the tone, the feel that I want it to come out to, based on who the audience is going to be listening to this ad, right, the video. And so I was able to do all of that. And then I think I'll mention here as well is, like, we ended up not being able to prepare it the way I wanted it to, with the tools, without having to, purchase a large contract or an annual program there. So what we ended up doing was then just going through another organization, like an offshore company that was able to get us a voice
Upwork, right? It was like an Upwork actor or something like that.
Yeah, and so they were able to do it, and it wasn't a big deal. It was pretty low cost, and still able to get it done. And we got the video created. Some of the AI was used for the imagery, video creation, and then of course the alignment of everything. So a lot of AI was used in it, and the biggest takeaway for me is that we got to be able to have the tools that allow us to do the proper prep work. So maybe if I had subscribed and done the annual subscription for one of the voiceovers, I would have been able to do all the prep I wanted to, right? But if the tool that you're looking at, or that you're working on or building, if it doesn't allow you to match your process for your organization or for your department into the AI program, it's kind of, you got to be able to compensate for that in some manner. And if not, then maybe there's a different option you got to look out for, because compromising that prep work is going to give you just a poor end result, I think.
Totally.
I think that's what it should be.
But what is super interesting to me is that process you went through, where you're like, oh, okay, we're going to use AI for the script. Okay, awesome. This turned out really great. We're going to use AI for the voice, for the voice generation. And it was good, but not quite what you wanted. So the lesson here is, you also need to be adaptive and not too rigid, where you're like, you know what? And again, what I love about it was, you're like, you know what? I think it's just cheaper to use Upwork and get a voice actor that way. And I've heard it, and it was really close to actually the AI voice. It was very close, but you're like, nah, it's a little cheaper, and I think it's a little bit better. And then you used AI. So use AI where AI is good, but don't get too stuck in one way. So it's very adaptive, in and out of, like, let's use traditional means. Let's be scrappy, and let's try different things.
Yeah, exactly. And to mention kind of our audience back here, I think around, from what we're seeing, registrations, about half are coming in from more of a small, medium-sized businesses from our attendees. And so I wanted to make sure that we talked a little bit about how maybe advice or perspective would differ a little bit for a company that maybe is a startup, they're bootstrapped, maybe they're gearing up for doing a Series A funding. What kind of advice would you give, or different perspective?
Yeah. Look, generally speaking, whether you're a micro business or you're a Fortune 500, my advice is begin that experimentation process. Like, you have got to, otherwise you will be disrupted. Just like, as I mentioned, like all those companies who inevitably went out of business, that didn't adapt through any sort of disruption, whether it's the Industrial Revolution or the computing revolution. This AI revolution is going to create winners and losers. Now, the nice thing, if you're a small startup, is you don't have the baggage of the old way people did it, right? So you can come in and you can say, I'm not going to go hire a blog writer. Like, I'm just not going to do it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hire a prompt engineer who can, at a fraction the price, right? Volumes more content and make it really on point to our industry. So I think you don't inherit, the copper wire that, the countries who came in afterwards and just went straight to cellular service. Like, there's an opportunity for companies now. The other thing I would say that, just as you consider things, don't think about employees. And if you're an employee, don't think about your job the way you've been thinking about it. There's opportunity for massive productivity. So don't think about AI necessarily. I mean, you might want to, of like, hey, what can I get done? I can get an 8-hour day done in like 3.5 hours. What you could also do is you could say, I can get, 16 hours of work done in 8 hours. I can become massively more productive and really, frankly, see my career on a crazy trajectory because I've learned to speak the new language. So if you're a startup, if you're an employee, if you're a large enterprise organization, if you're executive, I would say, like, winners and losers are being made right now. And you can see it in the stock market. Like, while you're sitting here, pull up your phone, go look at NVIDIA's stock price in the last 12 months. Go look at Microsoft's stock price in the last 12 months. Go look at Oracle's stock price in the last 12 months. I mean, go look at Adobe's. All of these companies who have really embraced generative AI are getting recognized and getting rewarded in the market. As a startup, as an executive, as an employee, winners and losers are being made right now. And you just got to decide, like, do you want to sit home and watch, reruns of Friends or Seinfeld, or are you going to go push yourself to do something that's new and probably uncomfortable?
Yeah, right. And thing that's coming to me is just be creative, right? If it doesn't seem out of scope, too large of a project, you don't have time, be creative about it. There's so much out there right now with the availability of where AI is at right now. There's no reason that we can't be more creative, use more of the tools that are out there, and get more done at this point. So
one of the big worries is, hey, are jobs going to get, are they going to get destroyed? The answer is yes. Like, in fact, early on, a friend of mine was this is like, I don't know, February of this year, went and asked ChatGPT and said, described what his job is and said, well, he first said, will jobs be removed in the market? And it gave like 2 pages of yes, these are all the jobs that are going to get lost because of you, ChatGPT. What jobs are going to get lost? And it listed them. And he's like, okay, well, because of you, here's what I do. Am I going to lose my job, or is my job going to be replaced? And it was like, yes. And here's all the ways. And then he asked the third question and said, what do I need to do in this role to adapt and become not disrupted? And it actually gave another 2 pages of reasons, like, of things he could do to be better. So there will be more jobs made as a result of this disruption in the market than jobs lost. The question is, what side of that bench are you sitting on? Are you sitting on the, I didn't adapt and my job got replaced? Because if I'm sitting here as a blog writer, boy, man, life feels pretty spooky. But if I'm a blog writer who is a master at prompt engineering and knows how to make GPT right, or BART, again, I use that, but any generative AI, if I become a master of the tool, I have a very, I've got a great future.
Yeah, and as you bring that up, I'm just recalling, as we're going through some of the McKinsey and Company surveys, analysis and reports, we have some of those links that are going to be provided afterwards in some of the documents. But I think, boy, there's like over 260 pages that the team went through and consolidated and got an outline of. And it talks about some similar things there that, hey, the jobs, there's going to be some disruption there, but there's going to be so much more opportunity as well. It's not something that you want to plant your feet in the ground and be like, okay, I'm going to stick it out. You want to adapt, you want to keep moving, you want to be creative and follow up, right? So, so we talked a little bit about this too. And it's like, okay, maybe for some people, they're really uncomfortable with it. They don't want to apply AI. They've worked for 10 years in building the perfect process. And now this AI revolution came about last year, and now it's just throwing everything in chaos. Like, okay, we're going to stick to it. We're not going to follow and get in the bandwagon. So what would we say to owners, senior executives, investors unfamiliar with AI, aware of it, believe in it, but not right now? Don't want to be too early of an adopter. What methods can they use to validate some decisions in implementing the AI product?
Well, I mean, look, I know we're about out of time, but the truth is, you can hire people who get it. First of all, like if it's something you're uncomfortable with, look, there's a whole lot of things my kids love that I'm not quite there yet. So like, I kind of understand that discomfort. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think the answer though is bring in people who are experts or who can become experts, who can embrace it. The second thing is learn and talk and learn and learn and learn, and just fiddle and play with things. Like if you haven't purchased, a premium, Bing account or or I guess the premium OpenAI account or used Bard, just while you have a little bit of free time, you're on a plane or whatever, just start playing with stuff. Like don't take it too seriously. Cause again, the good news is you're not actually behind it. I think we all kind of like, I think I'm reasonably versed in this stuff. Not, there's lots of people who know way, way more than I do, but I even feel a little bit like, man, is there something I'm missing? And the answer is yeah, but everyone's missing something. We're so early in this that I would say, don't worry. Just start trying stuff out and talk to people and talk to your peers, show up at events like this and just start learning stuff. I think, and the other thing people can do is say, look, I'm just going to watch what's happening in the market. I'm going to read articles like, the articles you've mentioned today. Just be very market aware and be really ready to enter. So you may not be a bleeding adopter. You might not even be a leading adopter, but if you're a late majority, that's probably still okay. That just might be your personality, but stay aware of what's happening and be ready to adapt as more established processes and more standard, successes and things start to emerge.
Okay. So as you mentioned, we're coming up close on time here, but I do just want to recap kind of what I took away from your conversation in driving revenue using AI is take it in small steps, pace it out. You don't got to do the whole thing at once, right? So test it in small segments, get everyone involved, get the ideas going now. Don't be afraid to take those first steps. And then as you're going, use that 3-step process, prep it, tune it, interpret the results. And then experiment as you go, right? Anything that you'd add to that?
Yeah. The only other thing is, research a lot, like Google it. There's a lot of new tools. I mean, as I've talked to people in kind of preparing for this, even, I hadn't looked, I went and spent the summer in Europe with some of my kids. And so it's been a month and a half since I'd really dug in. And then in preparation for this, I went and dug in again. And the number of new plugins and the new tools has grown. Like I'm shocked at how much has happened in like a month and a half, 2 months. And so I would say, go try things out. Things like you described, voice generation. There's a bunch of pretty cool tools out in the market. One I saw that as you do a video, it'll take all of the background out of your video. There's things I've found where it'll generate a PowerPoint for you. There's things like, and a lot of you know about a lot of these, but it'll, plugins in your email that'll, rewrite your email for you. There's plugins that will do almost anything. So just play with these new tools, talk to people. And I think in preparation for this, as you and I were doing this research, we found more than 30 new tools that people probably don't know about that we're going to make the list available also. And I would say, go fiddle with those, go try the free versions of them. There's a lot of interesting stuff, but I don't know that I would necessarily start with the tool, find the problem, and then go find the tool that looks like it could help, address the problem.
Perfect. Great. Well, Dave, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Great conversation on AI. Please stay tuned for our next live event presentations that are coming up next. I believe we have another 5 industry leaders speaking on AI strategies, insights, techniques that they've found, as well as 20 plus other presenters that'll be released on the top of every hour in 3 separate blocks. Thank you again for your time, Dave. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. Thanks, everybody.